So I'm Richard Schwartzstein, and I'm a professor here at Harvard Med School. I teach students all the way through med school from first year to fourth year, as well as trainees in internal medicine. And I'm a pulmonary and critical care doctor, so I do a lot of work with people with lung disease and in the intensive care unit. And the fun part of that is it brings me in contact with a whole range of physiological problems. And so I tell my students I try to be a Sherlock Holmes from a medical standpoint. So I approach medicine from an intellectual standpoint, from the perspective of clues and trying to solve problems and trying to discern the underlying elements of a mystery. He was one of my favorite stories, and of course most people know Arthur Conan Doyle, who wrote them, was a physician, and he patterned Sherlock Holmes after a professor that he had who he thought was really good at doing that kind of detective work. Of course, the irony is that Dr. Watson, who's Sherlock Holmes' sidekick, is a doctor, and he's clueless usually about everything going on. So I always thought Conan Doyle must have had fun with playing off the two things, the detective who was really good, and then his sidekick who was a step behind most of the time. I think so. It's one of these things. I thought I was going to be an engineer, middle school kind of thing, going into high school. My father got sick when I was about 15 with a really severe pneumonia and wound up in the hospital. And suddenly I started reading about what was wrong with him and what was going on, and I found that was a lot more interesting than engineering seemed to me at the time. So that's when I shifted over to biological science from physical and chemical sciences. Certainly most patients, if you look at what's going on with them in that way, I think it helps to keep you fresh, it helps to keep you engaged. Obviously there's a whole human element to medicine, on top of that, and you can't be a good doctor if you only do one and not the other. But for me, intellectually, that part was always keeping me fresh and thinking about new ways to understand what was happening. And then what I didn't realize so much at the early stages of my career is that my ability to then communicate with patients and explain what's wrong with them is much better by virtue of really understanding things at a deeper level than a lot of doctors do who kind of more superficial in terms of they know what to do, when to do it, what to give for a drug, but don't necessarily understand the underlying principles that are determining the health and disease of the individual patient.